that. Here we go. All right, hey everybody, welcome to Mixdown Techniques with Ableton Live. I'm Steve Knotts, and today we're going to be doing a 99 BPM track that sounds like this. So, what is the idea with the mix? The basic thing is we want to get this sounding loud and clear, obviously, where you can hear every sound in the track, and there is no significant problem happening like frequency masking, phase, the low end disappearing, overcompression, distortion, or worst of all, you get to a drop and it feels like the bass doesn't actually drop. All those problems can be fixed, and it is not that hard. Let's see. All right, got my audio up. So I made a little layout. On the right, you can see Mixdown Techniques. Basically what we're doing here is problem solving. There are issues that happen in a mix, and it's a lot easier to fix them when you approach it from the beginning rather than putting a whole bunch of channels in and a whole bunch of effects and a whole bunch of plugins and then trying to like fix it later. So the main thing we want to do is end up with headroom at the master channel. You can see I have some effects on the main left, right. I'm going to bypass those right now so you can see what this mix is doing before any master channel effects. The one thing I want is a spectrum analyzer because I use that a lot. And I think I'll turn up my broadcast level a little bit so you can hear this better. But notice on the master channel, when we're hearing this mix, we're still got about 9 dB of headroom. Let me check my broadcast to make sure that's not clipping. Okay, good. So I just bypassed everything on the master channel. And when I'm mixing, I'm only using the spectrum analyzer. And a little pro tip I want you to do is map a keyboard key to the spectrum. I use this little, whatever that thing is called, like an apostrophe up on the left, so that I can pull this up on the master at any time I want to and see what I am listening to. And let's start at the beginning with the kick drum. By the way, when you're watching this, if you're on the replay or live right now, say hi in the chat, let me know where you're from, and drop a comment. If you have a question about mixing with live, I'll get back to you in the comments, and we can talk about how to get this working. Let's get to a section of the track where we have the kick drum in all the time, loop to next locator, and play from there. Now, Mixdown Techniques. Mixing is problem solving. So let's start with the kick drum. What are the problems we want to solve with the kick drum? Well, first I want to avoid any problems with EQ and filter. First thing I do is pick a sample that I like. I cut the tail off so it's not too boomy, and I get some EQ. Let's bypass this rack. That's an okay sample, but it's not my favorite kick drum in the universe. It has some low, deep low end. So one by one, I started with some EQ, cut out some mids, got a big notch out at 114, a little bit of the lows I cut down, added a little bit of click or boost on the mids, 2.2K. To bring out that kind of click sound, I pulled in auto filter to be a little bit of a boost around 58 or 60 hertz to cut some of the sub frequencies out and just keep a little bump around 50, 60 hertz. And then this one is fun on band 5. I sucked out around 537 hertz. Another little pro tip on kick drums, go straight to 600 hertz and cut with a parametric EQ. You can always cut some frequencies around 600 or 500, and it's almost always going to sound better. Most kick drums for electronic music, they have this kind of woody, boxy sound around 600. That helps a lot to cut those out. And when I check on the spectrum, I can see that my kick drum has a nice bump down here at 45 and some big lows like 60 something hertz. Mid-range is sucked out down there. That's where our chords and harmonies and bass line and things are going to be living. So that's what I did with the kick drum. Sometimes I just go straight to drum bus and hit the kick drum with the drum bus, but in this case, I wanted to EQ it a little bit. Another important thing, gain staging. This little peak meter on the right side of your plugin devices, this should be green, like all the way up to the top, not into the red. It's okay if it goes a little into the red, but don't have it way down too low. We want to have the maximum level coming through the input of this channel so that when we go to the output fader, we know we're getting a healthy signal coming out. Peak on this channel is around -12. Peak on the master channel when the kick drum is soloed is -12. I'm going to stop right now and tell you the biggest pro tip you can take away from mixing electronic music. Solo the kick drum with, mute everything else except the kick drum and get the kick drum to -12 dB on your master channel. See that kick drum is playing by itself. We have 12 dB of headroom. If that's not loud enough in the room, turn up your monitors a little bit. You do not get a loud mix by jacking the channels up into the red on the master. You get a loud mix by making a balanced track and then having a big PA in the room or proper mastering after you finish exporting your mix. So minus 12 dB kick drum, that's what I want you to take away from this. We talked about spectrum and keeping that on a little keyboard key so you can see it. Let's move on to the instrument group and get the bass line coming in here. I like to use track groups a lot because it allows you to, one thing, mute all the instruments when you want to get them out of the way. And for another thing, you can make a subgroup where you identify bass, keyboard keys, melody, and lead. And it's a lot easier to mix your instrument group to balance the frequency range and get your stereo pan happening in the subgroup. So that's how I explain using track groups. And when I bypass these effects, you'll get a very clear view of the problems we're solving with the bass line. By the way, if you're watching right now, say hi in the chat, let me know where you're from. And if you have any questions, this is your chance to get them answered. So drop a question and I'll help you out. Okay, bass house operator patch. Bypass the effect track. My first reaction is that sounds cool in the headphones, but that's not necessarily what we want for a bass line. So the number one problem is I want a mono bass line. So I put on utility plugin, hit the mono switch, and avoid phase problems in the bass line. I can hear that that's something happening in stereo. I'm not interested in that. I could go into operator, hit my stereo spread, do it in my sound design module with that synthesizer, but for a basic go-to technique, take utility mono, drop it on your bass line, and that'll solve a lot of problems. And when you go to mono, if the bass line sounds weird and doesn't work, then you have the wrong synth for your bass line and change that up. Next thing, low pass filter. I like this bass line by itself, but I know we have drums and other synths in the track, so I only want to keep the low end of the bass line. So I just crack off a straight low pass filter. I'm not even going to really worry about EQing all this, detailed bass and stuff. Sometimes I go in and EQ like which bass note is louder. I boost up one of them, like boost up the A and cut the E a little bit, so all the notes are a consistent level through the bass line. We're not getting all hardcore into that today. We're just going to do a quick little low pass filter. And I can see on my peak meters that these bass notes are basically coming through at the same level. They're level enough that I can hear every bass note. You want to hear every note that's playing. That's the idea with the dynamics. So I can just put in a sidechain compressor from the kick drum. So now I have the kick and the bass working together. Bassline, instrument group, the raw bassline had some problems with stereo, so we put in a mono plugin, low pass filter, sidechain compressor. Let's move on to the keyboards, chords, and lead. Well, what is the difference between sound design effects and mix effects? Let me play these one by one. So the sound design effects in this one are the amp cabinet for tone, auto pan, phaser, even filter delay. Those are sonic effects that make the sound more interesting. They make it change over time. You can tweak them during the mix to get some kind of like performance effects. Those are not really mix tools. Mix tools are things about solving problems with the frequency, solving problems with the dynamics, presenting the sound at its best in the mix, and carving out space with other sounds for that, whatever instrument it is to work. So quick and easy. All I did with this one was I took some of the low frequencies out using auto filter, and I added a little bit of drive, kind of make it louder, kind of get a little buzz on there. That's really all this sound needed. And then mix the level so that it's roughly audible compared to the bass line. And this is a background chord. It's a very chill pad. It's happening often during the track. I hear it a lot, so I don't want it too loud. It's almost like a synth pad. Kind of a soft tone in the background. Little brighter here, I have a same sound-ish keyboard thing, and there was a little bit of brightness that I wanted to take down. So I put a little bit of mid-range EQ, high-pass filter to take out the lows because I have a kick drum and a bass line in the low frequencies, so I don't need lows from this keyboard. And then I get those working together with the bass line. And finally, operator lead. This sounds kind of like brittle to me, which I like. It's a high frequency sound. It's operating the high range above the keys. This is the spectrum looking at my little operator lead. Isn't that cool? It's poking up right there. Let's look at the whole instrument group one by one. This is why I love Spectrum. You can see where the sounds are popping up. And by the way, take a screenshot, copy these Spectrum settings because I have it set up to be the fastest response. The line stays in the same place. It doesn't recalibrate on the automatic setting. Just copy the range and all these settings on here and set up your Spectrum like that because it helps a lot. So there's our bass line. You can see the bumps happening down there with the kick drum. Sometimes, if I feel like the kick is too bright, sometimes I take down the top end of the kick a little bit. Spectrum, bass line, and kick. Instrument group, bass line. Chords are happening in the mid-range, but like the low end of the mids. Here we have chords and the keyboard melody. Add in the high blips from the operator lead. And you can even see on the spectrum that each one of these instruments is in its own range. We basically have 4 synths, sub, keyboard, lead, and synth lead, that are working together in the instrument group. So it's really easy to make a mix. And the sub mix we can mute and compare it on and off later. So one thing I might want to do with this sub mix is maybe get some separation with the keyboard lead and the high frequency bleeps. So we have the chords as a soft tone in the middle, keyboard lead, keyboard synth bleeps on the left. And we can hear each sound. What are the rules for a submix? Can you hear every sound that's in the submix, number one? Is everything in its own frequency range? And does it have a wide stereo field? If those things are happening, then you have a good submix that you can bring into the main mix, and it's gonna work, where you can hear every instrument, you can hear a wide stereo field, there's no frequency masking and dynamics problems. So the goal here is really to make a few simple submixes with instruments and drums, and then just bring them into the mix with a kick drum. And if you start with your kick drum at -12, you will have enough headroom for the mix. So let me check my lesson plan over here. I love lesson plans. Keyboard, chords, and leads, sound design effects versus mix effects. High pass filter is enough just to remove the lows out of the chords and leads. Operator lead, we had operator with, what effects are on here? High pass filter to get rid of any unnecessary lows that are not important for that instrument. We've got a little bit of filter delay happening. Subtle. And then some compression. You don't need a lot of complex tools. The simple things, if you have high quality sounds, the basics are enough. So operator lead, high pass filter, filter delay, compressor after delay so that we can do some more compression and bring up the delay reflections. Are you getting those delays? So if I do more compression with more makeup gain, the delay effect gets wetter. That's a good tip. Put the compression after your delay so that the soft tails of the delay get louder in the mix. And the instrument group. Now we have everything coming through the track group. I've got a basic glue compressor on there, slow attack time, auto release 4:1, threshold where there's only less than 5 dB of gain reduction and about 3 dB of makeup gain. And then with EQ, there were a few spots that the overall frequencies were adding up that I wanted to deal with. So on band 3 over here, those chords get a little moofy around 285. So I suck that down with a little EQ cut, and then a little bit too much brightness in those 1K, 2K area. So now I'm EQing the group to have it just feel buttery smooth. You can hear each instrument and there's nothing nasal, resonant, ear piercing, or sharp coming through the instrument group. And when I say sharp, I mean like texture sharp, not musically sharp. Instrument group, let's move on to, we talked about the levels of a submix, questions for a submix, glue compressor, EQ cuts. Now I'm gonna go straight to drum bus and I have to unmute this first for it to make sense. What do we hear? Drums group, risers coming in, and reverse crash, and a crash. So in the drum bus, right here on track 19, we have the drums group coming in, audio to drum bus, risers group, which has 3 layers of sound design for risers, and then the crash rack, which is a drum rack that has a whole bunch of sounds, reverse crash, a few layered crash cymbals. I wanted those all coming together into one place, but I didn't want to make a big complicated track group that had all these layers because maybe, I might want different EQ on the crash drum rack as compared to the drums group with hi-hats and snares. So drum groups are a great way to bring together a bunch of sounds and get the processing on there connected. So the drum bus tool has the plugin called Drum Bus, and then an EQ with a bunch of little cuts in there. If I bypass those, that's my raw drum mix. It's not that exciting. Let's take a look at the drums layers coming in here. So I'm going to mute the risers and the crash so we can just hear the few different layers. What I do with my drums groups are track groups. I start in left to right order. I put the most important ones on the left side. So track 8 right now is like the most important beat. Basically, track 8 is like the beat. And then I got another layer right there. Hi-hats, claps on track 10. Track 11 has different hi-hat. Track 12 is this scratchy textural thing. And then there's a ride cymbal that comes in. Later, thinking here. And that's a quiet little sound, so it's not a huge part. The quieter ones that are less important are farther to the right of my drums group, just to keep it organized so when I'm making my mix, I know which sounds need to get priority. That delay is bothering me. Here's another little pro tip. Put the Z key on your return effects so that when you're trying to talk and they're going on and on and on, you can quickly hit one little keyboard key and mute your returns. What are we talking about? How to mix the drums group. On each sound, there are some simple plugs you can see on layer 1, high pass filter drum bus. Layer 2, EQ8 drum bus. I'm not going to go in detail of every little thing I did on each one of these sounds. Looks like on layer 3, I experimented with the high pass filter. The sound was nasty and needed some more EQ cuts. So I went to EQ8. I can delete that auto filter. Before, after. Problem solving. Get rid of the nasty resonance. Cut out the part of the sound that you don't need. Keep only what you do need. That's why we say cut before you boost. Then you can take the part you need and turn it up louder. That's my summary of EQing. What did we do on layer 4? Again, drum bus, because I love that compressed sound of the drum bus plugin. And then afterwards, EQ, little high pass filter and a notch cut. Layer 5, that wispy sound. This is interesting because I didn't use, look at that EQ. It's all the way up. The high pass, oh geez, it's shelved way up to like 5K. Without processing, that's a big, nasty mid-range sound. After processing, kind of scratchy, kind of textural. I like it. And I might put some more reverb on that. What would that sound like with reverb? Okay. And then the ride cymbal. Kind of a bandpass filter sound. There is an auto filter on this low pass. If I turn up the resonance, you might hear that better. I wanted that ride to sound like it was moving around. So I used the auto filter LFO, sine wave shape, slow rate, and got those moving. Without the auto filters, that's kind of a big rowdy ride loop. Getting in the way, right? So what we're gonna do is turn on these two auto filters, get the ride to sound more subtle, but it's moving, so it doesn't disappear from your awareness. There's something changing in it in a subtle way, so you keep hearing it. I think I'm gonna add a little more makeup gain on this because it is a bit quiet in the stereo field now that I talk about it. Okay, so that is my drums group. I tried to talk a little bit about the individual processing and why I do those things. The idea is cut before you boost with EQ, cut out the parts of the sound you don't want, then take the part you do want, turn it up louder. Also, I should point out, when you have similar sounds like track 10 and 11, pan them in opposite directions. Both of these are a closed hi-hat and a clap. And I don't want them right on top of each other because then you lose the character of both of them. So when you have similar sounds, to avoid frequency masking and to avoid losing the individual character of the two sounds, pan them apart opposite directions in the stereo field. That could be hi-hats and claps. That could be guitar solos. It could be two vocals. It could be a keyboard lead and a synth lead. or any two sounds, if they're the same duration, dynamics, frequency range, just put them in a subgroup, pan them opposite, and then you get a wider stereo field and more of each sound in a cool way. That's a great tip for mixing drum sounds. And in fact, tracks 8 and 9, I could do that, but I know that they're not in the mix at exactly the same time. Layer 1 and layer 2 are not always playing at the same time. So like right here, in this part of the track, if I had layer 1 panned, it would sound weird because there is no layer 2. So that's why I avoid panning that one. And I'm not saying this is the best drum mix that's ever been made in the universe, but these are some tips that'll at least get your drums sounding good enough to hold the space in the track. Drums group, we got a glue compressor, again, slow attack, auto release, 4-to-1, not too much gain reduction, little makeup gain. And I did a low shelf EQ cut, a couple little notches, and pump that over into the drum bus track. Again, if you're watching it, if you have any questions, drop a comment. I'm happy to help and answer you when we see the questions pop up. How are we sounding now with our instruments and drum group? Monitor window. There we go. Now I have the return effects. Listen before the reverb and after. Tracks 10 and 11 have a lot of reverb. What about layer 1? We could make it real wet with the reverb, but I don't want to go crazy with it. Take that right down a little bit. And then return B is our delay. We'll get to that in a little bit. So in the drums group, we talked about glue compression, EQ, individual sounds, cut the lows, EQ the mids, do some compression, pan strategy, levels within the submix. Well, again, the submix strategy is, can I hear every sound? Do we have a balance in the frequency range? Do we have stereo mix separation to hear each sound? If you can do those things in your submix, guess what? You can do those things in your main mix. And at the main track, when you're listening to everything in your left-right stereo mix, the same questions apply. Can I hear every sound? Do we have a wide stereo field? Are the dynamics balanced so that the loudness is, does it feel loud without getting distorted or without some sound getting too quiet and dropping out of the mix? We want to have a smooth dynamic range with dynamics, but not over compressed to death. The questions for a good stereo submix are the same questions that you're going to answer for your main left-right mix, and that's a huge key to mixing. Let's move on to the risers group. This one is kind of just an accent thing for sound design purposes, and I can see that in the mix we don't have any in that section. I do recommend using markers in your mix. When you're doing a mix project for someone else or for yourself, put in markers and label them enough that you can find the sounds you want when you're looking for them so that you can mix them or illustrate what's happening. So I'm going to cut a loop right here. The risers are looping, and we have 3 layers of riser. Kind of a crackly static sound. There's automation in these devices. Auto filters, automation changing up and down constantly to give the risers a change over time. When I played this track in a different workshop called How to Escape the 8-Bar Loop, that was the lesson, is make some 8-bar changes in your effects so that they are always changing and doing something interesting. These are overlapping 8 bars or 7 bars so that the whole risers are kind of sweeping and moving through the track, and you don't have to sit there with your hand on the filter because you only have so many hands and you can't do everything. These risers are panned in different directions, so the riser submix has some stereo width, and each one is just moving around in space with an auto filter. So when I get to the group level, I do some glue compression, I have a soft clipper on here, and I just need these to be loud and be showing up relative to the drums. So I'm going to listen to the drums, ask the question, can I hear the risers? Are they adding to the vibe without taking my head off with volume? That's kind of pretty simple. Crash rack coming in, channel EQ, take down the highs a little bit, gentle compression, and these are different sounds in the drum rack. So let's check out the crash rack over here. Another ride cymbal in the crash. We have a reverse. It takes a little bit of time to mix your drum racks in detail. Basically, a drum rack is another stereo group or a submix. So when you're going through, one thing I like to do is, like, after I mix a certain sound, Sometimes I go and just change the color so I can see, okay, I already took care of these two in my drum rack mix, my reverse one. That's a little production tip. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but it helps me, especially if you have a drum rack with 128 samples. Change them all to the same color first, and then while you're mixing, go and like change the color of the one you did so you don't lose your mind wondering which sound in the drum rack you're hearing. That's a good little production tip. And again, all these three things, the drums group, the risers, and the crash track, are coming into the drum bus, which is this track 19. This is handy because when I want to mute all the drums and work on my instruments, I can get it right there in one channel instead of trying to mix or mute 100 different little samples. And when we get to the drum bus level, I can solo it, do some EQing, and some drum bus settings. You can copy those settings if you want to, or just, it's pretty simple. Compression, medium shape, a little bit of damping, a little bit of EQing, and that's all coming in there. Now, again, about leveling, we started with the concept that the kick drum is going to make about 12 dB is going to leave us about 12 dB of headroom at the master channel. When we add the drums, check our headroom. There's still like minus 10 dB. There's tons of headroom. We can bring in the instruments and start playing around with the mix, and we still have like 9 dB of headroom. There's a ton of room in there. We could bring in a whole loud vocalist with 10 overdubs and a backup vocal and have enough space in the mix for that. I like to be at this level in the mix so that if I need to push up the kick drum a little more, or if I need more bass, I can do it, especially with a client who wants a different mix. I like to have enough headroom where I can just automate something or push up a few dB on the low end and give them the mix they want without having to undo my mix or do any major Mixdown surgery. I do like mixing into a compression limiting strategy, so let me pull down my broadcast volume. I'm gonna click in my glue compressor and show you what's happening there. Let me just check my broadcast level. It's a little tricky mixing in a live stream, but this is a nice loud mix. You can see the master is flipping in the red a little bit here and there, so I'm gonna hit the limiter for that. Strategy, 2-to-1 ratio, auto release, 30 millisecond attack time. Not a lot of gain reduction. We don't want to smack the gain reduction very much at all. And I have a high pass limiter, a high pass filter at the input stage of the glue compressor. So it's not reacting to every kick drum. It's just kind of hitting the average level of the mix. To squash it a little bit, kind of make it more gelled as I'm listening and mixing with the limiter to just catch the peaks. And that gives me something that's going to sound loud in the room. I can feel how the mix is going to sound when it's mastered. And as I'm mixing my instrument groups and drum groups and effects, I have a pretty realistic image of what the mix is going to sound like. Now, when I go to export this, I'm going to turn these off and export a pre-master so I can get it mastered and have the professional mastering engineer deal with the detailed dynamics and EQing and things. But for a production mix that I'm going to make a test mix and maybe play it at a show or play it in a live stream or play it at a gig, make a test mix that's loud, I want it to come out as loud as the other tracks in my music library, so I do use a little bit of master channel compression and limiting and makeup gain in my export. Let's take a look at the spectrum analyzer. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I love spectrum because you can put your mouse on the frequency spectrum right where one of the sounds are popping up, where you see the sound visually, and when you look in the little box down here, it'll show you which frequency that sound is at. So for example, right now I can put my mouse on these mid-range sounds where the keyboard melody is popping up. I can read in the spectrum analyzer, oh, 479, oh, 500 hertz. Great. What did we cut out of the kick drum? 500 something hertz. So that middle area, the kick drum that didn't matter in the kick, is a great place for the keyboard chords and melody. That's a great example of making space in the mid-range so your sounds come through loud and clear without frequency masking and clashing. My favorite thing to look at in the spectrum is the kick drum and the bass line. Let me just illustrate this. I'm going to mute the keyboard melody and chords and lead. There we can see the bass line notes popping up. We can even put the mouse on the fundamental bass notes, B0, around 60 hertz. So kick drum and bass line together. I almost want to distort that kick and make a nasty saturated fuzz layer, but let's keep it simple for now. The idea with looking at the spectrum is I can see the kick drum on spectrum, I can see the bass line on spectrum, I can hear them both in the headphones. There's plenty of headroom on the master channel. And the mix is coming together. Now when I pull in the chords, the leads and the melody, they're sitting on top of the low frequency foundation, and it's all kind of blending. Now let's drop the drums. Get that groove happening. Now there's some automation in this mix with the B returns on the delay. So let's just listen and wait for that to happen. Got a little dub mix happening. I think I even had a section called Dub Effects Starts. So let's mix over to that in a second. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have the operator lead synth going into the delay return and some drums. Let me point out that the drum reverb is going into the drum bus, so I can compress the reverb with the drums, but the delay effects are going out to the main channel. And watch what's happening. We're muting some channels and turning up some delay effects to make an interesting build-up happen at this part of the track. Let's get a look at the overview if you like seeing that. There's our keyboard solo. I believe we have a riser happening. Bass line and some of the drums heading towards the drop with some delay effects coming through. That is a simple delay, auto filter, and a lot of compression because I don't want the delay getting out of control. And there's our drop. So that is a basic overview of how I mixed this track, starting with the low-end foundation of mono, kick drum, and bass line, adding in the instrument layers, adding in the drums, using sub-mixes to organize my sounds, and answering the basic question, can I hear every sound? Are the dynamics under control so it's not distorting on the loudness and it's not dropping out of inaudibility at the low level? Do we have, another question, do we have a wide stereo field where we can hear each instrument separated in the mix so the overall mix feels like it has some dimension to it? And then we bring it all together at the main channel with a little bit of compression limiting to get the mix up loud to export a test mix. So return effects, gain staging. I talked about that in terms of kick drum level and bass line. So we wanted the kick drum coming up at -12 dB on the master channel. We talked about gain staging with each individual sound. Use your peak meters, the ones in between your audio devices or audio effects or plugins. The idea is that every individual sound should be coming up loudly through the mix. When you get to a drum group or any other group, that should also have the peak level meter relatively high, not all the way up into the red, but loud enough that you can see there's some signal coming through. Let's go back to a part of the track where there's something happening. And if you use these peak meters to keep track of how loud your level is coming through each sound, you can keep each sound loud and clear without distortion, without going missing out of the mix. The idea of gain staging is it's something you do at every stage of the mix. You don't just do it once and then stop. You check the level at every stage through the mixdown process, from the individual channels through the tracks and groups, all the way over to the main channel. And even at the main channel, look at your peak level meters and make sure the sound coming through that level or that container is, you know where it is. And especially at the master or main, you don't want red clipping there because that will translate to distortion at your audio interface and make a mix print that's going to sound crappy. If you're watching on the replay, let me know in the chat, say hi, and drop a comment. I'm happy to answer your questions about mixing. And if you are interested in learning more about the mixdown process, I want to show you where you can find out with some really cool hands-on lessons. Let me loop this track so I don't run out of record. So this is a template called Moss Vibes that you can get from my Gumroad shop. Moss Vibes is a playable Ableton Live set where you get the scenes and session view to launch intros, build-ups, peaks, and drops. And the mix that we just went through right now is also done for you So you could swap out the MIDI notes, play your own bass lines and chords, and have a template for a downtempo track ready to go. And it's available here on on Gumroad. There's a video to show you what's inside and what you get. You basically download a live pack that has some instructions and everything built in. So it tells you how to play the set, what you're looking at, how to use it. So if you like this kind of downtempo music, you can get that. If you're more interested in the technical mixing of what I did with the track, there's a whole program called Make Space for Bass. That's a series of tutorials where you get a guided Ableton Live pack that shows you how to mix. Watch the trailer, watch this little thing. There's a track to mix, instructions built inside, examples built inside, automated activities for you to do, so you have the whole tutorial inside Live. It's called a session lesson. You do it in Session View. I invented these to teach people by using a tutorial built inside Live. So you do the lesson inside Live, you do it all inside Live, right? Like it says on the screen. And you can learn how to do gain staging and mixing with all the things I talked about in today's workshop. For example, EQing, cut before you boost, compression strategies, stereo mixing with subgroups, how to set your kick drum level, how to make your sub bass level, how to bring them all together at the master channel, and approach the gain staging theory to get a tight, solid low-end mix that drops heavy bass, no matter what style of music you're mixing. The principles all apply the same way. It could be hard techno, house music, drum and bass, downtempo, whatever you're making. You need to get your low-end in place and then get your gain staging working so your instruments and drums all sit together. And that's what you learn how to do in this course, which you can start for free here on Gumroad. There's a lesson called How to Mix Bass Heavy Tracks in Ableton Live, and you can sign up and get that right now for free. And one more thing I want to just show you because I uploaded it today and I think it's super cool, or over the weekend. Make Space for Bass, the Ableton Live Mixdown bundle. All these 4 modules are in a group and you can get them now, from gain staging, simple multi-track mixing, track groups with all those stereo mixing submix rules, and then bus groups and advanced routing, just like we did in the workshop today. And that's available here on Gumroad. Drop a comment or send me a DM if you would like a little promo code for how to get this for a little bit less, and I'm happy to hook you up with that. And that's going to be it for the stream for today. So I'm Steve Knotts. Again, drop a question if you have any questions, and I'm happy to talk about how to mix. And this is a series we're going to do Mixdown techniques once a week on Mondays with different tracks that I'm working on, so I can show you the same thing every time in a different piece of music. What did I do with the kick drum? What did I do with the bass line? What did I do with my instruments and approach a submix stereo group of those? What did I do with the drums? I'm telling you right now, the answers are going to be the same for each track, but the details are different every time. That's what makes mixing so much fun. It's the same basic principles, but the nuanced details of each sound are different, and I like to show the problem-solving technique and how do I approach each sound within each mix to make it sound right, so we can export a stereo mix and get version 2 or version 3 to be something playable that sounds good. So that's what's going on. Thanks, everybody. I am going to click the stop button and get on with the rest of my day. And thanks for watching Ableton Mixdown Techniques. Let's see, I need to go over to this one and then stream. All right, thanks a lot. See you later.